For nearly 2,000 years, one institution has ruled not just through faith, but through silence. Hidden beneath the smallest country on earth lies over 50 miles of secret archives, documents so sensitive that for centuries no outsider was allowed to read them. Inside those walls are records of trials, political conspiracies, secret letters to dictators, and decisions that shaped the fate of nations. But here's the question no one can ignore. What is the Vatican still hiding, and why has it taken centuries for the truth to come out?
In the heart of Rome stands a country so small you could walk across it in less than an hour. Vatican City covers just 109 acres. It has no army in the traditional sense, no sprawling cities, no elections like other nations. And yet, it commands the spiritual loyalty of more than 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide. This tiny sovereign state is home to the Pope, the most powerful religious figure on earth. Its influence stretches across continents, into politics, into wars, into diplomacy, into culture, and into the lives of everyday people. For centuries, the Vatican has presented itself as the moral compass of the world, a symbol of faith, a guardian of tradition, a voice for peace. But history tells a more complicated story. Behind the beauty of St. Peter's Basilica, behind the art of the Sistine Chapel, behind the sacred ceremonies broadcast to millions, there have been moments of secrecy, power struggles, political alliances, financial scandals, silence during global tragedy. Some call them misunderstandings. Others call them dark chapters. Today, we are not here to attack faith. We are here to examine history, because when an institution lasts for 2 millennia, when it survives empires, plagues, revolutions, and world wars, it gathers secrets. And some of those secrets have only recently begun to surface. To understand how the Vatican became so powerful and why so much remains hidden, we have to go back to the beginning, back to a time when Christianity was illegal, back to ancient Rome. If you walk through the polished corridors of Vatican City today, you'll see tourists, priests, Swiss guards, and diplomats. But far below the surface, past restricted doors and guarded entrances, lies one of the most mysterious collections of documents on Earth. For centuries, it was known as the Vatican Secret Archives. That name alone sparked imagination. Secret. It sounded like conspiracy, like forbidden knowledge, like hidden truths about history, religion, and global power. But here's something many people don't know. The word secret didn't originally mean hidden from the world. It came from the Latin word secretum, meaning private. In 2020, under Pope Francis, the name was officially changed to the Vatican Apostolic Archives. The Vatican said the old name caused misunderstanding, but that didn't erase the mystery, because the archives are real. They stretch over 50 miles of shelving, they contain millions of documents, and access is still highly restricted. Only qualified scholars with approved credentials can enter. Even then, they are limited in what they can request and view. So what exactly is inside? Historical records that shaped the world, letters from monarchs, diplomatic correspondence, trial transcripts, papal decrees, secret negotiations. One of the most famous documents preserved there is the trial record of Galileo Galilei. In 1633, Galileo stood before church authorities accused of heresy. His crime? Supporting the idea that the earth revolves around the sun. Today, that seems obvious, but at the time, it challenged the Church's interpretation of Scripture. Galileo was forced to recant. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest. For centuries, critics used this as proof that the Church silenced science. Only in 1992 did the Vatican formally acknowledge errors in its handling of the case. The document remained preserved in the archives, a written reminder of a moment when faith and science collided. But that's just one file among millions.
Inside the archives are also letters from Henry VIII requesting an annulment of his marriage. The Pope refused. That refusal led to the creation of the Church of England, permanently splitting Christianity in Britain. One decision, one document, one shift in global history. There are also records from the Knights Templar trials, diplomatic exchanges during global wars, and correspondence between popes and world leaders. Even letters connected to Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini are stored within those shelves. Now pause for a moment. Think about what that means. The Vatican was not simply observing history, it was participating in it. Critics argue that if the archives were fully open, we might discover uncomfortable truths. Supporters argue that the Church has gradually released documents as historians request them, and that the secrecy protects fragile historical materials. So which is it, protection or concealment? The truth may lie somewhere in between, because when you control information, you control the narrative, and for centuries the Vatican carefully managed what the world could see. But the archives are only part of the story. To understand why so many documents were locked away, we need to examine a period when fear and faith collided in one of the most controversial chapters in church history, the Inquisition. The word alone sends chills through history. The Inquisition, images of dark chambers, accusations whispered in secret, confessions extracted under pressure. But what was it really? The Roman Inquisition officially began in 1542 under Pope Paul III. Its purpose was simple, at least on paper, to protect the purity of Catholic doctrine. This was during the Protestant Reformation. Europe was dividing. Martin Luther had challenged the authority of the Pope. Protestant churches were spreading rapidly across Germany, England, and beyond. For the Vatican, this wasn't just a religious disagreement, it was a direct threat to its authority. And when institutions feel threatened, they defend themselves. The Inquisition created tribunals to investigate accusations of heresy. If someone was suspected of spreading ideas that contradicted church teaching, they could be summoned for questioning. Sometimes those investigations were careful and procedural. Other times, they were harsh. Interrogations could involve psychological pressure. In some regions, particularly during the Spanish Inquisition, physical torture was used to extract confessions. It's important to separate myths from facts. Hollywood often exaggerates the scale and brutality, but historical evidence confirms that punishments did occur. People were imprisoned, some were executed, and the fear was real. One of the most famous figures caught in this system was Galileo Galilei. His scientific conclusions challenged long-standing church interpretations. Though not tortured, he was tried, forced to recant, and placed under house arrest. For the Church, it was about preserving unity. For critics, it was about silencing truth. And here's the deeper issue. When faith becomes intertwined with political power, disagreement can become dangerous. Because questioning doctrine wasn't just seen as personal opinion, it was viewed as rebellion. Rebellion against God, rebellion against authority, rebellion against order. The Inquisition lasted in different forms for centuries. Over time, it evolved, it softened, it restructured. Today, its successor exists as the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, focused on theological guidance rather than punishment, but the legacy remains. The question remains. Was the Inquisition a necessary defense during a chaotic time, or was it an abuse of power fueled by fear? Historians still debate it, and the Vatican itself has acknowledged mistakes made during that era. In the year 2000, Pope John Paul II publicly asked forgiveness for the Church's historical wrongs, including actions taken during the Inquisition. That moment was powerful because it showed something rare for a 2,000-year-old institution: admission, reflection. But reflection does not erase history, and history leaves records that still sit in those underground shelves. As we move forward in this story, the pattern becomes clearer: power, crisis, secrecy, control, and sometimes silence. Because in the 20th century, during one of humanity's darkest hours, the world once again looked to the Vatican, and what it saw, or didn't see, would become one of the most controversial debates in modern history, World War II. The year is 1939. Europe is on the edge of collapse. Dictators are rising, armies are mobilizing, borders are dissolving. And inside Vatican City, a newly elected pope faces one of the greatest moral tests in modern history. His name was Pope Pius XII. Just months after his election, Germany invaded Poland. World War II had begun. Within years, the world would learn of something even more horrifying: the systematic murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. The question that has echoed for decades is simple. What did the Vatican know, and when did it know it? Critics argue that Pope Pius XII remained publicly silent while Nazi atrocities unfolded. They say he should have openly condemned Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust in direct, unmistakable terms. Supporters argue something very different. They claim the Pope chose diplomacy over confrontation, that he feared a public condemnation would provoke harsher retaliation against Catholics and Jews under Nazi control. So which version is true? The reality is complicated. We know that before becoming Pope, Pius XII served as a Vatican diplomat in Germany. He witnessed the rise of Nazism firsthand. In 1933, the Vatican signed a concordat, a formal agreement with Hitler's government. To some, that looks like cooperation. To others, it was an attempt to protect Catholic institutions inside Germany. As the war intensified, the Pope delivered speeches condemning racism and totalitarianism, but without naming Hitler directly. Was that caution? Or was it moral failure? Behind the scenes, evidence shows that thousands of Jews were sheltered in convents, monasteries, and even within Vatican properties. Some historians estimate that church institutions helped save tens of thousands of lives. But here's where the mystery deepens. For decades after the war, key Vatican wartime documents remained sealed inside the archives. That secrecy fueled suspicion. If the Church had acted heroically, why not open the records? Finally, in 2020, Pope Francis authorized the opening of the Vatican archives related to Pius XII's pontificate. Historians rushed in. Boxes were opened. Letters were examined. Reports were analyzed. What they found did not offer a simple answer. The documents reveal internal debates, intelligence reports about mass killings, diplomatic communications, weighing risks and consequences. The picture that emerges is not of a villain in a dark room, nor of a flawless hero. It is the image of a leader navigating impossible choices during a brutal war. Was he too cautious? Perhaps. Did the Vatican secretly assist victims of the Holocaust? Evidence suggests yes. But for many survivors and historians, one question remains. In a moment when the world needed a loud moral voice, why was that voice so restrained? The debate continues even today, and it highlights something central to our story. The Vatican often acts behind closed doors: quiet diplomacy, private negotiations, sealed documents. Sometimes that discretion protects lives. Other times, it creates doubt. But war is not the only arena where secrecy and power intersected with controversy, because in the decades after World War II, a different kind of scandal would shake the Vatican. Not about theology, not about war, but about money. When people imagine the Vatican, they picture cathedrals, ceremonies, and sacred rituals. Few imagine international finance. But the Vatican operates its own financial institution, officially called the Institute for the Works of Religion, often referred to as the Vatican Bank. It was established in 1942. Its mission? To manage funds for religious and charitable works around the world. On the surface, that sounds simple, but the world of global finance is rarely simple. And over time, the Vatican Bank became linked to one of the most shocking financial scandals in European history. The name at the center of it all was Roberto Calvi. Calvi was the chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, once Italy's largest private bank. In the early 1980s, Banco Ambrosiano collapsed with a massive debt, over $1 billion missing. Investigators discovered complex offshore accounts and secret transactions. Some of those accounts were linked to the Vatican Bank. The scandal exploded. Accusations of money laundering surfaced. Whispers of connections to organized crime began circulating. The Vatican denied wrongdoing. Then, in 1982, Roberto Calvi was found dead in London. He was discovered hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge. At first, it was ruled a suicide. Later investigations suggested murder. Why was he killed? Who was responsible? And what did he know? The mystery deepened when it was revealed that Calvi had ties to a secret Masonic lodge known as P2, a shadowy organization linked to political manipulation and financial corruption in Italy. Was the Vatican directly involved in criminal activity? No definitive proof has ever shown that church leaders ordered crimes, but the Vatican Bank did agree to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to Banco Ambrosiano's creditors, calling it a moral involvement, not legal responsibility. That phrase alone raised eyebrows. Moral involvement. It suggested knowledge without admission, responsibility without confession. The scandal damaged the Vatican's financial reputation for decades, and it wasn't the last controversy. In the 2000s and 2010s, new investigations revealed issues with transparency, compliance with international banking standards, and alleged money laundering through Vatican accounts. Reforms were promised. Under Pope Francis, efforts were made to increase financial oversight. Independent audits were introduced. Suspicious accounts were closed. In 2021, a Vatican cardinal was even put on trial for financial misconduct related to real estate investments in London. That was unprecedented. For centuries, high-ranking clergy rarely faced public financial prosecution. Now the world was watching. The image of spiritual purity collided with the reality of financial complexity. And once again, the same pattern appeared. Power, secrecy, crisis, reform. But the deeper issue is not simply about money. It's about trust. When billions of believers donate to the church, they assume those funds serve charity, faith, and humanitarian work. Financial scandal shakes that trust. And when trust is shaken, questions grow louder. What else lies beneath the surface? Because as we continue this journey into the Vatican's most controversial chapters, one truth becomes clear. The institution that claims moral authority over the world has faced moments where its own integrity was questioned, and the story is far from over.
Step inside the Vatican museums, and you enter one of the greatest artistic collections on Earth. Millions of visitors walk those halls every year. They look up in awe. They take photos. They whisper. But few stop to ask a deeper question. Was this art created only for beauty or also for power? At the center of it all stands the Sistine Chapel ceiling, painted by Michelangelo between 1508 and 1512. The moment you look up, you see the iconic image, God reaching out to touch Adam. But the story behind that ceiling is far more complex. Michelangelo didn't even want the job. He considered himself a sculptor, not a painter. Yet he was commissioned by Pope Julius II, a powerful and ambitious leader who wanted to display the Church's glory to the world. And that's the key. During the Renaissance, the Vatican wasn't just a religious center. It was a political powerhouse competing with kings, empires, and wealthy families like the Medici. Art became a message. It said, "We are eternal. We are powerful. We are chosen." Some scholars have argued that Michelangelo embedded subtle anatomical imagery into his paintings, including shapes that resemble the human brain, surrounding the image of God in the creation of Adam. Was that intentional? Many art historians believe so,
Michelangelo had studied human anatomy through dissections. If true, it could suggest that he was blending science and spirituality, perhaps even making a quiet statement about knowledge and divine intelligence. But here's where speculation becomes dangerous. Over the centuries, conspiracy theories have claimed that Vatican art hides coded messages, secret symbols about forbidden knowledge, hidden gospels, or suppressed truths. Most of these theories lack solid evidence. However, one undeniable truth remains. The Vatican carefully controls interpretation. Art inside the Church has always served dual purposes: devotion and authority. Consider St. Peter's Basilica. Massive, grand, overwhelming. When you stand inside, you feel small. That's not accidental. Architecture can inspire faith, but it can also reinforce hierarchy. During the Renaissance, popes invested enormous wealth into art and construction. Critics at the time questioned whether church funds were being used responsibly. In fact, the sale of indulgences, certificates said to reduce punishment for sins, helped finance some of these projects. That practice sparked outrage, and that outrage helped ignite the Protestant Reformation. So even the beauty of Vatican art connects back to controversy. Power and faith intertwined again. The Vatican preserved priceless masterpieces, works by Raphael, Bernini, and Caravaggio. Yet at the same time, it guarded its cultural influence tightly, because art shapes belief, and belief shapes society. But artistic mystery is subtle compared to what came next, because in the modern era, the Vatican faced a crisis that no masterpiece could distract from, a scandal that shook believers across continents, and unlike ancient documents or Renaissance symbolism, this was happening in real time.
For centuries, the Vatican's controversies were buried in history books. Then, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, headlines around the world began reporting something deeply disturbing: allegations of sexual abuse by members of the clergy, and even more damaging, accusations that church officials covered it up. This was no medieval trial, no Renaissance politics, no wartime diplomacy debate. This was about victims. Investigations in the United States, Ireland, Australia, and other countries revealed patterns. Priests accused of abuse were sometimes reassigned instead of removed. Complaints were handled internally. Victims were silenced or ignored. The crisis exploded publicly in 2002 when investigations by journalists uncovered extensive abuse cases in Boston. That reporting won a Pulitzer Prize and later inspired the film Spotlight. The damage to the Church's credibility was immense. For many Catholics, this wasn't just scandal, it was betrayal. Trust in spiritual leadership depends on moral authority, and moral authority collapses when harm is concealed. The Vatican responded with new policies. Under Pope Benedict XVI, the Church began implementing stricter procedures for handling abuse allegations. Later, under Pope Francis, additional reforms were introduced. New reporting systems were created. Bishops were held accountable. Church law was revised to address abuse more directly. In 2019, Pope Francis held a global summit at the Vatican focused specifically on preventing sexual abuse within the Church. It was a historic moment, acknowledgement at the highest level. But critics argue reforms came too slowly. Survivors demanded transparency. They asked, why were abusive priests protected? Who knew? And how far up did the knowledge go? These questions cut deeper than any previous scandal, because this was not about theological interpretation or financial complexity. It was about human suffering. The Vatican's global influence made the crisis even more visible. When an institution claims to represent moral truth, it is judged by higher standards. And in this case, many believe those standards were not met. The Church has since paid billions of dollars in settlements worldwide.
But financial compensation cannot erase trauma, nor can public apology instantly restore trust. The abuse crisis forced the Vatican into something it historically resisted: full public accountability. And yet, even now, debates continue over transparency. Are all records open? Are all cases reported? Has the culture truly changed? The answers are still unfolding. But one thing is certain: the Vatican of the 21st century faces a challenge unlike any before. Not from emperors, not from reformers, not from invading armies, but from its own members, and from a world that demands openness. As we move forward, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Across centuries, from the Inquisition to World War II, from financial scandals to abuse crises, the Vatican has stood at the center of history, sometimes as protector, sometimes as participant, sometimes as accused. The question that remains is not whether the Vatican has secrets. Every powerful institution does. The real question is this: in an age where information spreads instantly and silence is no longer sustainable, can the world's oldest religious power truly remain behind closed doors?
When an institution survives for nearly 2,000 years, when it holds spiritual authority over more than 1 billion people, when it operates behind ancient walls with restricted archives, mystery is inevitable. And where there is mystery, there are theories. Over the centuries, countless rumors have linked the Vatican to secret societies. The most famous of them all? The Knights Templar. The Templars were a medieval military order founded in the 12th century to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They became powerful, wealthy, influential, too influential. In 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered their arrest. They were accused of heresy, corruption, and secret rituals. Many were tortured. Some were executed. The Pope at the time, Clement V, dissolved the order under pressure from the French crown. But here's where legend begins. Some believe the Templars discovered hidden knowledge, sacred relics, secret gospels, or ancient treasures, and that the Vatican either seized it or helped conceal it. Is there solid historical evidence for these claims? No. Most historians agree that the charges against the Templars were politically motivated. Philip IV owed them enormous debts. Destroying the order eliminated his financial problem. But the myth endured, and the Vatican's involvement in the Templars' downfall added fuel to centuries of speculation. Then there's the Illuminati. Founded in 1776 in Bavaria, the Illuminati was a short-lived secret society that promoted Enlightenment ideas and opposed religious influence in politics. Over time, conspiracy culture transformed it into something far larger, an all-seeing global force manipulating governments and institutions. Some modern theories claim the Vatican secretly collaborates with or fights against such hidden powers. But again, evidence is thin. What is real, however, is that the Vatican has always engaged in diplomacy and global politics. It maintains formal diplomatic relations with over 180 countries. That means ambassadors, private negotiations, back-channel communications. And when diplomacy happens quietly, outsiders sometimes assume the worst. The truth is often less dramatic than conspiracy theories suggest, but secrecy in governance, even for legitimate reasons, creates space for imagination. There's another layer to this story. Throughout history, popes have excommunicated kings, negotiated treaties, and influenced elections. That kind of influence makes some people uncomfortable because it blurs the line between spiritual authority and political power. And whenever power operates behind closed doors, suspicion grows. The Vatican insists that its diplomacy serves peace, humanitarian aid, and religious freedom. And in many cases, it has mediated conflicts and supported global charity efforts. But the perception of hidden influence remains. Why? because the Vatican rarely reveals the full details of its private negotiations. And that brings us to something very real, not legend, not medieval myth, but modern-day leaks that exposed internal Vatican struggles to the world.
When people think of the Vatican, they picture the Pope, a single figure in white robes, standing on a balcony in St. Peter's Square. But the Pope does not govern alone. Behind him stands an intricate administrative system known as the Roman Curia. The Curia is made up of departments, councils, congregations, and offices that manage everything from doctrine to finances to diplomatic relations. It is, in effect, the Vatican's government, and like any government, it contains factions, disagreements, power struggles. One of the most secretive processes in the world happens when a pope dies or resigns, the papal conclave. Cardinals under the age of 80 gather inside the Sistine Chapel. The doors are locked, no phones, no outside communication, no public discussion. They vote in secrecy until one candidate receives a 2/3 majority. Black smoke means no decision. White smoke means a new pope has been chosen. It's a ritual unchanged for centuries, sacred, symbolic, controlled. But what happens when internal tensions spill outside those walls? In 2012, during the papacy of Pope Benedict XVI, confidential Vatican documents were leaked to journalists. The scandal became known as Vatileaks. The leaked papers revealed internal corruption allegations, financial mismanagement, and intense power struggles within the Curia. The source? The Pope's own butler. He was arrested, tried, and convicted for leaking private documents. The world watched in disbelief. If the Vatican's inner circle was leaking secrets, how deep did the internal conflict go? Just 1 year later, in 2013, something happened that had not occurred in nearly 500 years. Pope Benedict XVI resigned. Officially, he cited declining health, but the timing, following Vatileaks and ongoing reform pressures, raised speculation. Then came the election of Pope Francis, the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and a leader who immediately signaled change. He chose simpler clothing. He emphasized humility. He spoke openly about reforming Vatican finances and administration. But reforming a 2,000-year-old institution is not simple. Reports continued of internal resistance. Some cardinals supported modernization and transparency. Others feared that too much change would weaken tradition. This tension between reform and preservation defines the modern Vatican, and it reveals something important. The Vatican is not a single unified voice. It is a complex institution shaped by human leaders with human disagreements. The secrecy of the conclave protects spiritual discernment, but it also shields political maneuvering from public view. And when power is concentrated in small private circles, accountability becomes harder to measure. Across every century we've explored, one theme keeps returning. The Vatican survives by balancing revelation and restraint. It reveals enough to maintain legitimacy. It restrains enough to preserve authority. But in today's world, where information spreads instantly and secrets rarely stay buried, that balance is becoming harder to maintain. And now we arrive at the final question. Can the Vatican remain an institution of ancient mystery in an age that demands modern transparency? Because the future of the Church may depend not on what it hides, but on what it chooses to reveal. For nearly 2,000 years, the Vatican has survived emperors, invasions, plagues, reformations, revolutions, and world wars. It has adapted when necessary. It has resisted when pressured. It has apologized, sometimes centuries later. But today, the challenge is different. The modern world does not move slowly. Information travels instantly. Whistleblowers can reach millions with a single click. Financial records are scrutinized globally, and moral failures are no longer buried in silence. Under Pope Francis, the Vatican has made visible efforts toward reform. He ordered audits of Vatican finances. He pushed for greater accountability in handling abuse cases. He simplified some church bureaucracy. He emphasized humility over grandeur. In 2019, new financial transparency laws were introduced. In 2021 and beyond, high-ranking clergy faced criminal trials inside Vatican courts, something almost unimaginable decades earlier. For supporters, this signals a church finally confronting its weaknesses. For critics, it's not enough. They argue that true transparency would mean fully opening archives, publishing internal investigations, and dismantling long-standing cultures of secrecy. But here lies the dilemma. The Vatican is not just a political institution, it is a spiritual one. Its leaders believe certain traditions, like the secrecy of the conclave, protect sacred processes from outside influence. They argue that discretion allows diplomacy, mediation, and pastoral care without political pressure. And in some cases, that discretion has helped negotiate peace in global conflicts. So the tension remains. How does a 2,000-year-old religious monarchy operate in a democratic, digital age? How does it preserve sacred ritual while meeting demands for modern accountability? How does it remain timeless in a world obsessed with transparency? This is not just about scandals. It's about identity. The Vatican stands on foundations built in the Roman Empire. Its rituals echo medieval Europe. Its art reflects the Renaissance. But its audience is global, modern, and informed. And younger generations, especially in the United States and across the Western world, are asking harder questions than ever before. They are not content with silence. They want clarity. Because faith today competes with skepticism, and moral authority must be earned, not assumed. The Vatican's future may depend less on its secrets and more on how it handles the truth. We began with a question. What is the Vatican still hiding, and why has it taken centuries for the truth to come out? After exploring its rise to power, the Inquisition, wartime silence, financial scandals, artistic influence, modern abuse crises, internal leaks, and reform efforts, one truth becomes clear. The Vatican is not a single story. It is a paradox. It has preserved ancient texts that might have been lost to history. It has inspired art that shaped civilization. It has influenced peace negotiations and humanitarian missions across continents. And yet, it has also faced moments of moral failure, moments of secrecy that fueled suspicion, moments when power seemed to outweigh transparency. The walls of Vatican City were built for protection from invaders, protection from chaos, protection of sacred tradition. But in protecting itself, the institution sometimes created distance from the very people it serves. History shows us something important. Institutions are human. They are shaped by decisions, fears, ambitions, and beliefs of the people leading them at any given moment. The Vatican's darkest secrets were not born from mystery alone. They were born from power. And power, when concentrated, always carries risk. But here is the final twist in this story. The Vatican is not frozen in time. It continues to change, to respond, to confront its past, slowly, imperfectly, but visibly. Whether those changes are enough, only history will decide. Because centuries from now, historians may look back at this era, our era, and ask the same question about today's leaders that we asked about the past. Did they choose silence, or did they choose truth? The Vatican's story is far from over. Its archives are still being opened, its reforms are still unfolding, its debates are still alive, and perhaps the greatest secret of all is not what was hidden in the past, but what the future will reveal.